Oh, you think Jaws is scary? Oh, you've seen nothing yet. This family of shark-like fish holds a special place in my heart because one of them, the genus Adestus, has a very unique set of teeth which inspired one of the characters from my original upcoming book, a hyper dinosaur called Version 2. And while I'd love to make a video on Adestus someday, it's on a very, very long list of stuff I want to talk about. Today is not that day. Today, we'll be covering the story of its larger relative, Helicoprion, the shark-like fish with a set of teeth that resembled a buzzsaw. I'll be covering the discovery of the animal, how many species belong to the Helicoprion genus, the paleobiology of the animal, the world it called home, and then its ultimate extinction. It's time to meet Jaws' scary older brother. Let's get to it. Like and subscribe if you enjoy this content, and check out my other documentaries. They're linked below and cover a range of topics. Enjoy! So the striking thing about Helicoprion is, of course, the buzzsaw mouth. Need I say more? Yes? Okay. Like most cartilaginous fish, we don't have fossils of the skeleton itself, just the teeth. Nonetheless, despite only really having teeth, the fossils are very widespread, so the genus was definitely successful. It certainly evolved its odd-looking jaw for a reason, and its success shows that it was a good trait. Helicoprion fossils have been found in Russia, Western Australia, China, Japan, Laos, Kazakhstan, Norway. Man, Norway can't catch a break in these documentaries. Fossils have also been found in Canada, Mexico, and the western and central regions of the United States. And out of all of the fossils we have, around 50% of them are from the species Helicoprion davisi, and these are mostly from Idaho. Which makes sense because Idaho was under the ocean at the time. Most of the western United States were. You know that new movie 65? Imagine if there was a film like that, but instead they crash in a Permian ocean and these fish come at them. That's a scary idea. Someone get on that. While on the topic of different species of Helicoprion, there are currently 3. Helicoprion davisi, Helicoprion bessanowani, and Helicoprion ergasemonen. I hope I pronounced those right. If not, I am terribly sorry. I could not find pronunciation guides. There are also 3 synonyms of davisi, 1 synonym of bessanowani, and there are also 3 other intermediate species as well. Just remember that out of all of these, the first 3 species named on screen are the only ones considered valid. And telling the difference between them can actually be a bit difficult, because the differences only become apparent in adult individuals past the 85th tooth in the spiral. Some whorls have also been found which are hard to describe to, or can't be described to, any currently known species. An example of this would be Helicoprion specimen IMNH 14095, which has unusual teeth that don't really match any currently known species. A few other specimens that are kind of anomalies have popped up here and there, but have yet to have a consensus on them reached, and a few have even gone missing since they were originally found. Davisi, which was originally thought to be an Adestus actually, was discovered in 1886. It was discovered by Henry Woodward, a geologist and early paleontologist following the establishment of the field. Ergasemonen, you know what, we're just going to call it Helicoprion species E, was discovered in 1966, and Bessanowani, same thing, we're going to call it Helicoprion species B from here on out, was discovered in 1899. It's really interesting how far back some of these species were discovered. These are the early days of paleontology in some cases, back when they thought Stegosaurus was a theropod and Megalosaurus was a quadruped. Almost all of our Helicoprion specimens are known from the tooth whorls, which you can see on screen now. On these whorls, the tooth size increases away from the center of the spiral. with the largest teeth being over 4 inches in length. You can see the increase in tooth size in this picture. And while we only have pieces of this animal, these pieces can tell us a lot about them. Such as the fact that these shark-like fish got big, like basking shark big. Seriously, if you look up a picture showing the size compared to a human, you'll never be afraid of Jaws again. Now, as you can see from the picture on screen, the whorls kinda spiral around itself. Now, like I said in the Anatosuchus video from a few weeks back, I am not a paleobiologist, so some of the biology terms kinda escape me a bit, but I'm going to explain this to you the best I can. And thankfully this stuff is not nearly as complicated as each individual bone in the skull of a little duck crocodile was. So take a look at the whorls on the diagram on screen. The lower part of the teeth form projections that are shingled below the crown of the previous tooth. And the lowest portion of the root below the enameloid tooth projections are referred to as the, quote, shaft. The shaft encapsulates the previous revolutions of the whorl, and in a complete one, which thankfully we have well-preserved fossils of this jaw, the outermost part of the spiral terminates with an extended root that lacks the middle and upper portions of the tooth crown. Now, even though we have well-preserved fossils, sometimes it's kind of hard to put it into the animal itself. The diagram you see on screen is generally accepted how the teeth would go into the mouth, but there's also other ideas. One of the early ones even had the teeth whorls kind of forming a trunk coming down off the nose. I like the Buzzsaw shark look more. Now, like I mentioned earlier, generally we only have fossils of the teeth and whorls from Helicoprion. Heck, I think this applies to all sharks and other cartilaginous fish specimens. Say that 5 times fast. I'm pretty sure teeth are all we have from even, the much more recent Megalodon, let alone something around 300 million years older. There's only a few exceptions ever where any prehistoric shark fossilized more than their teeth. However, a specimen of Helicoprion davisi, found in Idaho known as IMNH 37,899, or Idaho 4, is the best known preserved specimen of the genus, with its upper and lower jaws being basically intact. The jaws were closed but preserved in 3 dimensions. This specimen was actually used to create the reconstruction you see on screen now. Thankfully, it allowed us to learn a lot about Mr. Buzzsaw here, because until its discovery, we didn't have any conclusive ideas about how its teeth, or the whorl itself, fit into its mouth. This specimen allowed us to actually see how the teeth went inside the mouth and where exactly they were. Unfortunately, the part of the skull which would have housed the brain did not preserve, but the fact something outside of the teeth and whorl did is still incredible. With any kind of shark or shark-like fish, any kind of bone preservation is exceedingly rare. By the way, all art and photo credits and attributions are in the description of the video. So, on to this animal's paleobiology. First, we need to talk about why it has a Texas Chainsaw Massacre mouth. Scientists agree that the saw-like tooth structure and serrated teeth, as well as the lack of wear on said teeth, implies Helicoprion likely ate a diet of soft-bodied animals like cephalopods or fish. Hard-shelled prey, like ammonites, would probably slip out of Helicoprion's narrow jaws, which is interesting. I've read that its cousin Adestus likely evolved its teeth for hard-shelled prey like ammonites, so it's interesting that their diets would have been so varied. I suppose that's probably the case because Adestus lived in the late Carboniferous and not the early Permian like Helicoprion. So even though they both lived in the same widespread region, they wouldn't have had the same exact animals to prey on, with only a few exceptions to that, like ammonites. The narrow shape of Helicoprion's jaws means it likely didn't suck prey in, but instead it bit down on them and likely sliced them apart with its buzzsaw-like teeth. It's also thought that the teeth had specific functions depending on where on the whorl itself they were positioned. The teeth on the frontmost part of the spiral were probably used to snag prey and pull it into the mouth. Then the teeth in the middle would spear the prey, and then the teeth in the backmost part of the spiral punctured the prey and pulled them down into the throat. Helicoprion also likely bit its prey in a manner very similar to how modern sharks chomp down on their prey, again with its teeth cutting its prey with each bite like a saw blade. These bites also likely served as a method to initially capture and push prey deeper into the mouth before sawing through them after they were squeezed inside. It is absolutely terrifying to think about. If you were a fish and you were caught by Helicoprion, you would basically be filleted alive unless you got lucky enough to have the first bite slice your head off. Helicoprion also had a rather powerful bite force as well, meaning it could probably eat and cut through hard bones of vertebrates too, and probably allowed it to eat hard-shelled prey if it was in a pinch. And some scientists have put forth a theory that if hard-shelled prey, we'll pick on ammonites again for this example, but let's also throw nautiloids under the bus too, were bitten head-on, the teeth could probably forcefully pull it out of the shell and into the mouth like a spaghetti noodle. Other evidence also exists which suggests Helicoprion could eat both soft-bodied and hard-shelled prey just as easily as the other, meaning anything small, hard-shelled or soft-bodied could fall prey to that whirl of teeth and be sucked into the throat after being sawed apart and crushed. Maybe it preferred animals which were easier to bite through, but anything was fair game. So if you were a fish, you'd be filleted alive and decapitated by the whirl, and if you were an ammonite, then the whirl would turn you into prehistoric pasta before shredding you into pieces. Man, all of that is scary. That's just scary. Someone, please give me a 47 meters down spinoff with a Helicoprion. We've had great whites, we've had blind sharks, now let's have a prehistoric one for the finale. I don't care how unrealistic it is, I want it! This animal lived in the Permian period. If you don't know, that is the era that preceded the era of the dinosaurs. This was a rather important era of Earth's prehistory. It was the last period of the Paleozoic era, and it really set the stage for what was to come in the Mesozoic and even in the Cenozoic. Helicoprion as a genus was around from the Artinskane stage of the early Permian until the Rhodian stage of the later Permian. During the Artinskane, there was a global warming event known as the Artinskane Warming Event, or AWE. This period of global warming was basically the culmination of a warming planet following the late Paleozoic Ice Age, a Devonian-era ice age, which is a whole topic in and of itself. Glaciers only remained at the polar region of Gondwana following this period of warming. For context, Gondwana was an ancient, possible supercontinent, which existed from the Neoproterozoic until the Jurassic for roughly 370 million years, which was then when it began to break up. Some of the animals Helicoprion would have shared its subsurface world with, and swam alongside of, in the prehistoric oceans of the Permian include animals like sponges, rugose corals, brachiopods, and gastropods. Squid are also believed to have been an animal Helicoprion might have preyed on with some frequency. Such animals would have been very easy to slice apart with its serrated whorl of teeth. Xenacanthus was another animal which might have competed with Helicoprion for some of the same food, and likely would have also become prey to the much larger Helicoprion. Xenacanthus was only about the length of an adult human arm, and we've discussed already that Helicoprion was massive, and it would have given Jaws himself a run for his money. However, Xenacanthus was not just shark-like, but it was an actual shark, and it would appear before and outlive Helicoprion, lasting from the Devonian all the way to the end of the Triassic period. Obviously, we can only speculate, but one thing I love when I make videos like this is reconstructing the ecosystems and speculating how the animals would have interacted with each other. Check out my videos on Auroran and the Cretaceous-era volcano in Louisiana for more of this kind of thing. Moments where I try to guess how these different animals would have interacted and where they might have lived. I love this aspect a lot because you can really just imagine so many scenarios. The top of the Arton scan is where the Conodonts genus, whose name I'm totally going to butcher here, so it's on screen, Neostreptogenethodus first appear as well. A conodont is, we'll just say, an alien-looking thing. It's a jawless vertebrate with so many teeth that if it were bigger, it would give Helicoprion and every actual shark nightmares. Thankfully, these weren't large animals, but they make up for their small size with their sheer amount of teeth. Melosaurus, an Erops-like animal, is another animal which would have been present in the later period of Helicoprion's time on Earth, during the Guadalupan epoch of the Middle Permian. The Guadalupian was the period in time Helicoprion went extinct. During the Rhodian, the exact era Helicoprion vanished, there was Olson's extinction, a major loss of vertebrate life. We'll cover that more in the next section. Anyway, these mentioned animals and more would have shared their world with Helicoprion, and hopefully now you all have a better idea of this diverse world which was full of unique animals. Yeah, it's just a tiny glimpse into the whole picture, but it's a look through that window. Helicoprion as a genus lived for around 20 million years throughout the first half of the Permian. For context, the Permian itself lasted for roughly 47 million years, so Helicoprion was definitely successful in this very different world compared to Earth today. And that's important to remember. Helicoprion evolved the way it did because of its environment, but ultimately its environment changed, and this unique animal was no longer suited for the new one that took its place. It looks odd to us because our only perspective is the world today, not the world then. You might be thinking that Helicoprion died out in the Great Dying, the famous Permian extinction event. But no, it died out in the earlier Permian extinction. I believe it died out in the aforementioned Olson's extinction, which was around halfway through the Permian, and it saw a completely different range of biodiversity and ecosystems rise up afterwards when compared to the early Permian. This mass extinction occurred roughly 273 million years ago, and it was the catalyst for the total change in early and late Permian era faunas. Basically, the first half of the Permian and the second half have completely different animals and ecosystems when compared to each other. Now, that wasn't the end of the story. The order Helicoprion belonged to, the fish that had tooth whorls, lasted all the way until the early Triassic. And today, the closest living relative to Helicoprion are chimeras, also known as ratfish, spookfish, and, rather fittingly, ghost sharks. I say fittingly because, as far as I know, they're all that's left of this family. So, in a way, they are a ghost of the past that has hung on to the modern day. A past that is so far away from us, in some ways, really isn't completely gone. And that's kind of beautiful. Now, unlike my Auroran and Anatosuchus documentaries, where I took time to go into other similar and related animals, outside of the focused on one to give you a wider idea of just how diverse the family got as a whole. Like, for example, in the Auroran video, I talked about Gracopithecus and Ardipithecus after covering Auroran. I'm not going to do that in this one. I want to keep the focus on Helicoprion, and I'm not going to divert for half of the video to talk about other animals and their extended family, like Adestus or Sarcoprion. Though I might give Adestus its own video in the future, and maybe I'll talk some of the others in that one instead. I don't want to do that with this video, though. I want to keep it focused on the animal in the title. And at most, in this section, I'm going to bring Adestus up here and there just for a bit of comparison. So with all that in mind, Helicoprion has been covered, and I'm going to wrap this one up. Alright, it's time for the 10-minute rant that goes at the end of all these videos where I just talk about the animal and my love for prehistoric animals in general. So first, I want to ask, what did you think of Helicoprion? Doesn't it give Jaws a run for its scary money? Like I said at the beginning, this order of shark-like fish is just kind of dear to me because Adestus played a very important part in inspiring my story and a character who means a lot to me. And I actually didn't know much about Helicoprion, so this research was really interesting. I learned a lot about how this animal worked, and it was just fascinating. It's an animal that catches your eye, certainly. And I wish I'd taken the time to learn some of this stuff sooner. And, learning how this animal functioned was just as interesting as the animal looks. But hey, better late than never. And I'm honestly loving making these documentaries, and the support I've seen on them has been wild for someone with as small a following as I have, so that really means a lot to see that people really seem to enjoy these. So earlier I mentioned that someone should write a movie script or a story, kind of like 65, but crashing in the ocean with Helicoprion as the plot instead. I still think and stand by the idea of crashing on a prehistoric Earth and being menaced by giant, scary, buzzsaw-mouthed fish is terrifying to think about. And I think it could work as a movie plot, just, unlike with 65, there would be no dinosaurs in that one. Though 65 seems to be making up some fictional animals to feature alongside its dinosaurs anyway. But none of those have buzzsaw jaws. If you want to know my thoughts on 65, I made a video a little while back discussing it. The point of all that is the premise of crashing on prehistoric Earth could, be used to not only bring less known animals to the masses, less known animals and periods, I should say, to mainstream, but, it can bring some of these incredible animals that existed during these times, like Helicoprion and Adestus. I actually gave version 2 Adestus teeth for that reason, and to just help make him more frightening, but also to, maybe make some people more curious about the animal, since its teeth are just very bizarre and eye-catching as well. And, they stand out being inside the mouth of a dinosaur because no other dinosaur has teeth like that. Adestus had very bizarre scissor-like teeth, which is what I first noticed when I discovered the animal. And just like Helicoprion's chompers, they're just very bizarre to look at. Anyway, back to the topic of the video. Helicoprion, I've said it, but I'll say it again, it's just fascinating. That whole order of animals is Helicoprion, Adestus, Toxoprion, Sarcoprion, all part of the superfamily Adestioidea. They're all just so cool looking and so unique. We don't see animals like that today, hence why, well, they seem odd looking and eye-catching to us from our perspective. Like I said earlier, they belong to basically a different world and evolved to fit in it. They don't fit into the world today, which is why they look so odd to us from our perspective. But it also makes them more fascinating, all the more fascinating. And again, this research was just super interesting, learning the way that how these animals worked, and, it was wonderfully interesting. I've read about Adestus quite a bit, partially to just understand them better since I used part of them for one of my book characters, but also just because they were interesting. But I never did that for our buzzsaw buddy here, Adestus' larger relative, so I didn't know most of this information before researching for this script, and I think it's a shame that paleo movies don't really branch outside of dinosaurs much, because there's so many really cool animals here, and most films just opt to stick to the mainstream ones. And I wish some of these other, animals got more attention. They deserve it. Yeah, in my stories, which narrations of the rough drafts are linked below, I'd love feedback. If you like prehistory of any era, you'll probably be interested in it. I try to give animals from throughout prehistory, mainstream and lesser known ones, attention. I tend to favor dinosaurs, yes, but I don't like to give them the sole focus. But that's just me. I love dinosaurs as much as the next person, so I'm not mad that they get so much attention in movies, though I get annoyed when the only prehistoric shark people tend to focus on is Megalodon. I've touched on this before, but I think some others, like ones from this order, even though they're not true sharks, are much cooler, and also less known to most people, which is a shame. Like, seriously, I'd rather see one of these or an Adestus in life over a Megalodon if I could pick. And I hope you found this animal as interesting as I do, and I hope you learned something. If you really want to see some interesting stuff, look up some of the outdated reconstructions of this animal. The whorls really caused confusion for a while about where they fit into the animal's mouth. Fair. I found some of those really interesting. I thought it was just, interesting to see how the jaws worked on this animal in particular. Odysseus's jaws are just as interesting with how they function as what the purpose of what the very unique structure of the teeth actually had. It's interesting to think about, and it's terrifying to think about what the prey animals that experienced, being literally sawn apart by that jaw went through. I also thought it was interesting how each section of the teeth had a different purpose. I never really thought about that or what the function of the whorl was. So it was just fun to read about and learn about, and I hope you found it as interesting as I did. This is probably one of the most interesting animals I think I've made a video on yet. And Helicoprion was also just freaking big. Again, Jaws is no longer scary if you think about this animal. That's a 20-footer. 25. Laughable. Great white shark? Get out of here, amateur. Buzzsaw-faced shark? Hell yeah. 37 feet long buzzsaw-faced shark? Now we're getting somewhere. It's not only bigger, I guarantee it probably has a more painful bite. Considering what we covered about how its jaws work and what its teeth would probably do to you, and I'm really curious on how dangerous to people it would be if it was still around. I'm sure it wouldn't be opposed to attacking humans, especially with its size and strong bite force. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this would be one that people would be advised to avoid if seen in the wild or at the beach. Some sharks are docile, but I don't think this would be one of them. We can speculate on behavior all day, but I don't think Helicoprion would be docile like a nurse shark or a leopard shark. Tell me what you thought of it. I really want to know what you think of this animal. I hope you enjoyed, and tell me about animals or topics you'd like to see me cover in the future. I'm wrapping this up before I go on another tangent about prehistoric animals. I couldn't quite cover everything about this animal, so I encourage you to look up some more about it just to learn some of the more in-depth details. Also, check out the artist who drew the Helicoprion picture you saw on the thumbnail and on screen now. The next prehistoric animal I'll be talking about will either be Arcanthrosaurus or the Pyroraptor. And it's not just paleo topics I've got coming up. I have more historical topics I want to talk about too. I have so many topics I want to talk about, I might just have to make a wheel and spin it to decide. But as far as prehistoric animals go, it'll be either one of the two dinosaurs in the next prehistory-focused video. That is for certain. But the next documentary itself will either be about one of those animals or about more ships which vanished either at sea or on the Great Lakes. We'll see which one I decide to do. I think I'm leaning towards the Great Lakes one I talked about in the Waratah video. I love Indiana Dunes. I used pictures I took there last summer for this video, and that's on the Great Lakes. So I'd love to make a video about the Great Lakes. And the dunes are just gorgeous. Go if you've never been. You won't regret it. So it'll probably be that. It'll probably be that topic. And then something prehistory related will probably be afterwards. Alright, until the next video, that's all for now. Like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Check out my other documentaries, and until next time, have a good one, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.